My name is Daniel Carter. At 31, after losing my job in Chicago, I inherited my uncle's farmhouse in rural Vermont. The place was isolated, 15 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by cornfields and dense forest. The house itself was a relic: creaky stairs, wallpaper peeling like dead skin, and a basement that smelled of damp earth and something sharper, metallic. The first week was uneventful. I spent days cleaning and nights drinking bourbon on the porch, listening to the chorus of crickets. Then on the 8th night, I noticed it, a faint glow from the basement window. At first, I assumed it was a reflection, but the light pulsed, soft, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. I grabbed a flashlight and circled the house. The basement door was locked, the window covered in grime, but through it, I saw the source: a single bare bulb swinging from the ceiling, casting long shadows across the dirt floor. I hadn't turned it on. I called the local sheriff, a grizzled man named Colson. He arrived an hour later, chewing tobacco and squinting at the basement. "Your uncle mentioned that light," he said. "Said it'd come on by itself sometimes." We checked it back in 2009, found nothing. That night, I slept with a knife under my pillow. The light returned at 2:33 a.m., always 2:33. I'd wake to its glow seeping under my bedroom door. By the third night, I heard sounds, scratches like fingernails dragging across the basement walls. I stopped sleeping. I found my uncle's journals in the attic. His handwriting grew erratic over the years. On the 10th night, I armed myself and descended the basement stairs. The bulb swung violently, though the air was still. The dirt floor was disturbed. Not footprints, but grooves, as if something heavy had been dragged. In the corner, a hatch I'd never seen before, padlocked. I called Colson again. He paled when I mentioned the hatch. "Your uncle had that installed after his wife disappeared in '98. Said it was for storage." That night, the scratching turned to knocking. 3 slow raps on the hatch, then a voice whispering my name. I fled to town at dawn. Colson met me at the diner. "Your uncle's last journal entry," he said, sliding a page across the table. It read, "I sold the house to a developer. They bulldozed it. But sometimes, driving past that empty lot, I swear I see a glow in the darkness. Just a flicker, deep underground. I thought selling the house would end it. I was wrong. 3 months after the bulldozers reduced my uncle's farmhouse to rubble, I received a package. No return address, just my name scrawled in shaky handwriting. Inside was a rusted key and a note. They're still waiting." C. Colson. It had to be. I called the Vermont Sheriff's Office, but the dispatcher's voice turned cold when I asked for him. "Deputy Colson retired last month," and she said, "left no forwarding address." That night I dreamt of the hatch. In the dream, I knelt in the dirt, pressing my ear to the metal. The knocking came again, 3 slow raps, followed by a wet, gurgling whisper. "Daniel, you forgot something." I woke up choking. My apartment smelled like damp earth. The next morning, I drove back to the lot. The developer had abandoned the project. The land was overgrown, the basement filled in with concrete. But near the property line, half buried in weeds, I found it, the hatch. Somehow it had survived the demolition. The padlock was still there, crusted with rust. The key fit. I shouldn't have opened it, but I needed to know. The hatch groaned as I lifted it, revealing a ladder descending into blackness. The stench hit me first. Rotting meat and that same metallic tang from the basement. I shone my phone light down. The ladder ended at a dirt tunnel, its walls reinforced with rotting wooden beams. And then I saw the writing. Scratched into the beams over and over were names. Eleanor Carter, my aunt who vanished in '98, Jacob H. Colson, and others I didn't recognize. Dates spanned decades. The newest carving read Daniel Carter with yesterday's date. A sound echoed from the tunnel, something heavy being dragged. I ran. As I slammed the hatch shut, a hand shot out of the darkness. Not human. Too long, too many joints. It grabbed my wrist, and the skin where it touched burned like frostbite. I wrenched free, leaving strips of flesh on its jagged nails. Back in my car, I called the only person who might believe me. Deputy Colson's ex-wife, Linda. She answered on the first ring. "You found it," she said, not a question. "Jacob tried to seal it. That's why he disappeared." "Seal what?" I demanded. She hung up. That night, the knocking came to my apartment. 3 raps on the front door, then the bedroom window, then, impossibly, from inside the closet. I barricaded myself in the bathroom until dawn. At sunrise, I drove to the nearest church. The priest paled when I described the tunnel. "Your uncle's land," he said, "was part of an old burial ground. The farmers, they didn't just bury their dead there." He wouldn't say more. I'm writing this from a motel 200 miles away. The key is on the nightstand, oozing a black fluid that stains everything it touches. Last night, I woke up to whispering outside my door. Not one voice, dozens. They're learning my new address. I'm 30 now, and the city's cacophony is a strange sort of comfort, a constant hum that drowns out the silences I learned to fear. But the first 10 years of my life were spent in Oak Haven, a village nestled so deep in the folds of the countryside, it felt like a forgotten secret. Oak Haven wasn't just small, it was shrinking. Houses stood empty, their windows like vacant eyes, and the population hovered around 60 souls, mostly elderly, clinging to the old ways. Even as a child, I was allowed to roam freely. Everyone knew everyone, or so we thought. My best friend Thomas and I knew the growl of each aging tractor, the limp of Old Man Hemlock, the exact shade of blue of Mrs. Gable's prize-winning hydrangeas. It was a world contained, predictable. That particular autumn, the air was already crisp, promising an early frost. The annual Harvest Home Festival was approaching, a subdued affair in Oak Haven, but one that held a peculiar significance. The centerpiece was always the elder bloom wreath, woven with specific late-blooming wildflowers called starcaps, which only grew in the shadowed fringes of Blackwood Forest. This year, Old Mother Elmsworth, the village matriarch whose hands were gnarled with arthritis, had tasked Thomas and me with gathering them. "A basketful, my dears," she'd rasped, her voice like dry leaves. "The woods are kind to little feet." She'd promised us a share of her famous honey cakes, a powerful incentive for 2 10-year-olds. Blackwood Forest bordered the eastern edge of Oak Haven, its trees ancient and densely packed. We usually played at its sun-dappled edges, never venturing too deep. The starcaps, however, preferred the gloom. Thomas, ever the pragmatist, carried a sturdy wicker basket. I clutched a small, illustrated guide to local flora, mostly for show. We searched for an hour, the forest floor damp and fragrant with decay. The silence was profound, broken only by the rustle of our own movements and the occasional caw of a distant crow. We'd found barely a handful of the elusive white flowers. Frustration gnawed at me. The honey cakes seemed a distant dream. "They're just not here," Thomas grumbled, kicking at a pile of leaves. He was always more attuned to the undercurrents of things, a little more wary than I. "Maybe further in," I suggested, eager to press on. It was then that we saw them, not heard them approach, but simply saw them, standing at the edge of a denser thicket as if they'd materialized from the shadows themselves. There were 2 of them, tall and slender, swathed in dark, almost shapeless cloaks that seemed to absorb the meager light. Their hoods were pulled low, obscuring their faces, but I had the distinct impression of pale skin beneath. They were utterly still. "Lost, little ones?" A voice emerged from one of the figures. It was soft, melodic, almost a lullaby, yet it sent a prickle down my spine. It was too gentle, too practiced. Thomas instinctively stepped closer to me. "We're looking for starcaps," he said, his voice firmer than I expected. The other figure shifted, a barely perceptible movement. "Starcaps?" The voice was a near echo of the first, a soothing harmony. "They are shy blooms. Not many know their true haven." I, ever the trusting fool, brightened. "Do you know where they are? We really need to find them for Mother Elmsworth." A pause, then the first figure seemed to incline its hooded head. "We know. There is a place, a dell, where they grow thick as fallen snow. Not far from here. We can show you." Thomas tugged my sleeve. "Our mum said not to go too deep," he muttered, his eyes fixed on the strangers. He didn't look at me, a sure sign he was deeply uneasy. The second figure chuckled, a sound like wind chimes in a drafty room. But this is for Mother Elmsworth, is it not? For the harvest home, a sacred task. How did they know about the sacredness? We hadn't mentioned it. It's just over that rise, the first one said, gesturing with a pale, long-fingered hand that emerged briefly from its sleeve. A short walk. We wouldn't want you to disappoint the village. Despite Thomas's silent apprehension, the lure of the honey cakes and the gentle, persuasive voices were too much for my young mind. Okay, I said, already taking a step forward. Thomas reluctantly followed. They led us, not walking so much as gliding over the uneven forest floor. No twigs snapped under their feet, no leaves rustled. The forest grew darker, the trees pressing in, their branches like skeletal fingers. The air became heavy, cold, and the familiar woodland sounds faded until all I could hear was the thumping of my own heart and Thomas's ragged breathing beside me. "Are we nearly there?" I asked, my voice small. The earlier confidence had leached away, replaced by a creeping dread. "Almost," the melodic voice cooed. "Just through here. The Whispering Dell, they call it." We emerged into a small circular clearing. It was unnaturally quiet. The trees surrounding it were gnarled and ancient, their bark almost black. And in the center, there was indeed a carpet of white flowers. But they weren't starcaps. These were larger, their petals too perfectly formed, glowing with a faint, sickly luminescence in the dim light. They looked hungry. The two figures stopped at the edge of the clearing, turning slowly to face us. One of them raised a hand and gently pushed back its hood. I wish it hadn't. The face beneath was pale, yes, but also smooth, unnervingly symmetrical, with eyes that were too large, too dark, and utterly devoid of pupils. A serene, gentle smile stretched its lips, but it didn't reach those vacant eyes. "Beautiful, aren't they?" it whispered, its voice now holding a strange, hypnotic resonance. "They need tending. They need fresh dew." Thomas grabbed my arm, his fingers biting into my flesh. "Ilara," he choked out, his voice a raw whisper. "They're shadows. They don't have any." I glanced down. He was right. Despite the faint light filtering through the canopy, the ground beneath and around the figures was unmarked. A cold terror, pure and absolute, seized me. This wasn't just stranger danger. This was something else, something ancient and utterly alien. "Come, little ones," the other figure said, its hood still in place, its voice dripping with that same terrible sweetness. "The flowers are waiting." It took a step towards us. "Run!" Thomas screamed, yanking me so hard I stumbled. We turned and fled, crashing blindly through the undergrowth, the basket and flower guide forgotten. I could hear them behind us, not the sound of running, but a swift, rustling glide, like wind tearing through dry reeds. A low, crooning hum pursued us, punctuated by soft, disappointed clicks. Branches whipped at our faces, roots threatened to trip us, but we didn't dare slow down. I sobbed, a purely instinctual sound of terror, a primal need to escape. I don't know how long we ran, only that my lungs burned and my legs were lead. Then abruptly, we burst from the tree line, back into the wan afternoon light, stumbling into the familiar muddy track that led to Oakhaven. We didn't stop until we collapsed onto Mother Elmsworth's porch, gasping and crying. The humming had stopped at the edge of the woods. Mother Elmsworth listened to our fragmented, terrified story, her ancient face growing grimmer with every word. She didn't scold us. Instead, she gathered us close, her papery skin surprisingly strong. "The Whispering Dell," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Some paths are best left untrodden. Some visitors are best left unmet." She gave us honey cakes, but they tasted of ash in my mouth. That year, there was no elder bloom wreath at the Harvest Home Festival. No one spoke of starcaps again, and no children were asked to gather flowers from Blackwood Forest. The memory of those smooth, smiling faces and those empty, dark eyes still visits me in the quiet hours of the night. Sometimes, when the city wind howls just right, I hear a faint melodic hum, and I know that whatever waited in the Whispering Dell, whatever those things were, they are patient, and they remember the taste of fear. I never liked summer vacation much. Other kids talked excitedly about beach trips, amusement parks, and sleepovers. But for me, everything about summer changed the year we were sent to stay at Grandpa's house in the countryside. My parents were always busy, working 2 jobs each. They barely had time to look after me and my older sister Amy, who was 2 years ahead of me. When school let out and online classes ended, they told us we'd be spending the summer at Grandpa's. "It's peaceful there," Mom said. "Wide open spaces, good for your minds." Maybe they just needed a break from parenting, or maybe they truly thought the countryside would be a calm, healing place. They were wrong about that, very wrong. Grandpa lived on an old farm, miles away from the nearest town. The air smelled like wet grass and dust. The house was a 2-story wooden building with faded red paint, surrounded by thick woods on 3 sides, and a wide open pasture on the 4th. On the surface, everything seemed ordinary. But the silence, that silence was too deep, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The day we arrived, Grandpa showed us around. Amy and I chased chickens in the yard and threw sticks for Shadow, Grandpa's old black dog. Shadow was friendly, though his eyes seemed tired and watchful, like he knew more than a dog should. Grandpa showed us the vegetable garden, the chicken coop, and the small cabin near the edge of the trees where we would sleep. That night, the silence pressed in around us, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I lay awake for hours, unable to sleep. Then just past 1:30 a.m., I heard it, a slow, heavy crunching of footsteps outside the cabin. I sat up. The steps were deliberate, dragging, like boots sinking slightly into damp earth. I crept to the small window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek out. Beyond the yard, where the moonlight spilled across the grass, something moved at the edge of the trees, a shadow taller than a man, swaying slightly like it was trying to stay still. I couldn't make out its features. The trees behind it barely moved, even though the figure should have cast more disturbance. Then the steps faded, vanishing into the wind. I slid back into bed, holding my breath. Amy was snoring softly, completely unaware. I pulled the blanket up to my neck and whispered to myself, "Probably just a deer, maybe a stray dog, nothing to be scared of." But I didn't believe it. The next morning, we went with Grandpa to feed the livestock. As we neared the tree line, Shadow suddenly stopped walking and began to growl, low and steady. His fur bristled. Amy and I froze. Shadow stared into the trees, teeth bared. I followed his gaze, and there it was again. A dark shape, barely visible, unmoving between the trunks. "Grandpa," I whispered, "there's something over there." He didn't look. "Could be a deer," he said casually. "Lots of animals live out here. Just don't wander into the woods." But the thing we saw didn't move like a deer. It didn't move at all. That night after dinner, I went to wash my hands at the old stone well near the shed. The air had turned strangely cold. As I turned to head back, I heard a soft scraping noise behind me, like dry leaves being brushed aside. I spun around. Nothing. Just the dark. Then a hand, freezing cold and rough, landed on my shoulder. I shrieked and turned again. No one was there, but I heard it, clear and cold, brushing right against my ear. "You came!" I ran. I didn't care if I tripped or scraped my knees. I burst into the house, panting, face pale. Amy and Grandpa looked up from the table. "You okay?" Amy asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Later, I lay awake again. The moonlight spilled across the wooden floor. My ears strained against the stillness. Then came the noises. Gasping, whispers, and soft scratching at the walls. I pulled the blanket over my head. The shadow had returned, and this time, it wasn't keeping its distance. I heard slow steps moving around the cabin, circling, pressing closer. The next morning, I was a wreck. I told Amy everything. She didn't laugh like I thought she would. Instead, she looked serious. "I've heard things too," she whispered. "Something tapping on the window last night. I thought I imagined it." We spent the afternoon digging through an old photo album on Grandpa's dusty bookshelf. One photo caught my attention. A faded image of a young woman, our Aunt May, smiling stiffly, standing next to a man with sharp features and dark eyes. Half his face had been scratched out with a knife. Grandpa walked in just as we were staring at it. His expression darkened. "That's your aunt," he said slowly, "and her ex-boyfriend." "What happened to him?" Amy asked.
"He disappeared," Grandpa said, voice quieter now, "vanished one night after a fight. The police looked, but he was never found after that. Strange things started happening on the farm. I asked, is it him in the woods? Grandpa didn't answer right away, then he nodded. I don't think he ever left, not really. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. The air was colder than before. At exactly midnight, a knock came at the front door, firm, measured, 3 times. The lights went out. Moonlight shone through the windows, casting pale lines across the hallway floor. I stayed frozen in bed, unable to breathe. Then came the voice, "Open up. I'm here for them." My heart nearly stopped. Footsteps creaked from the other end of the house. Grandpa was awake. He walked slowly toward the door, flashlight in hand. His voice was low and firm. "You don't belong here, leave." A low growl came from outside, and then silence. Grandpa locked the door, one bolt at a time. "He's getting bolder," he muttered. "It's time we called someone." The next day, Grandpa notified the local authorities. They searched the area and discovered a hidden pit behind the old tool shed, a small dugout space, covered with boards. Inside were rusted knives, a hammer, and a shredded backpack. The man, our aunt's ex, was finally found, dirty, disoriented, but alive. He had been living in the woods for years, obsessed with Aunt May, waiting for her to come back. He believed she had sent replacements. He confessed everything. He had watched us for nights. He had almost come inside. We left the next day. My parents didn't hesitate. They changed jobs, moved back to the city, and kept us close after that. But I still remember that summer, the weight of the silence, the chill of that breath near my ear, the knock in the dark. In the countryside, not every shadow belongs to a tree. Some stand and watch and wait.